UKMotorTalk.
Hello everyone, we are back. This is UK Motor Talk. I'm Mike, hello.
I'm Graham, hello, and welcome.
And I'm Dave. What ho, chums? What have we all been up to?
What haven't we been up to? More like it. I decided it was probably time to get the Mini out and actually use it, because it's been taxed and insured the whole year round, and it has been living on the road, I'm ashamed to say, just down from my house. But I have a new neighbour who has a 4-car driveway and of course insists on parking 1 car on the driveway and 1 on the road. So that's great, and it's become a bit of a pain to park, so I spent most of its time in the compound at work, and I felt a bit sorry that I haven't really used it, so I've been out and enjoying that, and it's made me remember how good a light, agile, front-wheel drive hot hatch can be. It certainly rekindled my interest in slightly older cars, because this is, 22 years old this year, so it's getting on a bit now, and sort of started me on a path of looking at other front-wheel drive hot hatches, many of which I then try and tempt you with, Dave.
Don't you just? Yes, dangerous stuff, but at the prices people are asking, and with the history that they've no doubt had before, these people are actually quite rightly putting them back to standard, which is very admirable, and that's exactly the way I would want, particularly an Uno Turbo, which has always been my poison of choice. I think I would probably steer clear personally, but something a bit newer, as you are happily piloting around again now that the weather's starting to get a tiny bit better. Sounds like a bit more of a more usable proposition. I mean, it's still a relatively recent car, and parts are far more available, and they're less likely to have been wrapped around trees in the sort of 40 years that an Uno Turbo's been on the road, which is a scary thought in and of itself. There are ditches and trees and blown cylinder heads and knackered turbos and all sorts of unpleasantnesses that can have befallen the thing, I know for a fact. I think I'd go for something a bit newer personally, and the Mini probably is the spiritual successor, especially the one with the supercharger. Sounds like a lot of fun. Might even have a look for one myself.
I maintain that if you want that sort of spirit, but in a slightly newer form, the Mark 7 Fiesta ST, the type that was around from 2013 to about 2018, that shape, that is probably in my top 5 cars that I've driven. I owned one, and I've said it many times before, sold it and bought an RS Focus, regretted it. And when I look back over the 40 odd cars I've had, it's definitely high up there on cars that I would buy again. And bearing in mind that you can buy one in ropey condition for about £3,000, or one in nice condition, really, really nice condition of sub 10, but good condition for about 7, I would suggest that is probably a great car and a good time to buy, because I'd almost guarantee that that's going to be a future XR2 in terms of modern classic, just before things got irritating with bongs and beeps and driver aids and all the rest of it. But at the same time, with all the bits on that you'd want, climate control and bum warmers and all that kind of stuff if you want it. It's all there. That is an absolute gem.
It's perhaps a sign of the fact that spring might be approaching and the weather is somewhat slightly kinder. I seem to be seeing more sort of 80s, 90s cars out on the road, in modern classics, practical classics, call them whatever you will. I mean, just things that I remember road testing in period that are sort of coming round again. And I saw a very nice Jaguar S-Type R the other day. Which was a very, very quick motor car, very capable at speed. You see very few of them, but there's a couple of them around, which is nice to see.
It's nice when you see people getting the cars out and playing with them again. And it, like you say, it does seem, maybe it's global warming, it does seem to be happening earlier and earlier each year. And because there's less need for the salt on the roads, because we've had less frost and less snow and ice and all that sort of thing. People think, well, it's probably worth risking getting the car out, isn't it? I know for a fact one of my mates, who's a classic car aficionado, Rob, who occasionally listens. Hello, Rob, if you're listening. He had to press into service service one of his classic fleet because he's modern-ish. Fiat 500 has had a number of faults, which you might expect given the badge on the front. But, far be it from me to say. But he had to dig out one of the Morris Minors and get that going, and he normally won't take that anywhere near a gritted road. But it's a sign that these things are there and to be used. It's still a car, isn't it? And ultimately, it's your pride and joy, and you want to look after it. But yeah, I've seen a few nice things knocking around. Actually, thinking about it, an XR3i, a really early one, the Mark 1 XR3i, the straighter edged version. I saw one of them the other day, and I thought, Christ, when was the last time I saw one of those? So nice to see them, isn't it? It's a little treat at this time of year, people starting to risk getting the car out.
It's funny you should say that, because I've actually got a Mark III XR3 downstairs at work at the moment, in black, 1982. It's a treasured example. It's quite an honest car, but by chance, I happen to have that on display just below my office. So that's up my current weapon of choice. It's funny you say you've seen one out and about, but I think a lot of this is because the rolling 40-year exemption for road tax means that you just keep it taxed all year round. And then if there's a good day, you can take it out. Unlike me, who's being fleeced for, 360-something quid a year on the onion at the moment. So despite the fact it's taxed, and more on that later in the year on the podcast as to why it's taxed, the Mini 430-odd quid is still just a car, really. So you can take it out and justifiably use it even if it's raining and the kids enjoy it. It makes more of an event of going to the shops. So, Graham, have you been up to anything car or motorsport related since we last spoke?
Well, yes, indulge me in a proud grandfather moment, if you will. We bought for Christmas some go-karting tokens for grandson, who's 11, and he had gone once relatively recently. We took him, and rather better than I expected. He just, whether it's in the genes or whether he just really, really enjoys and learns fast, but he was in an under-12s race. He's 11. Most of the other kids were the same age as him, 11, 12, one or two younger. But he was second in that and consistent. He was turning consistent 41-second laps. So he was second in that race. And the lad that did win it clearly had more experience, and that's fine. And then he was put into a adults and children's race. And he was second again. And considerably quick. I mean, the adults are in more powerful carts, but he was considerably quicker than most of the adults. All right, he's got perhaps a lighter weight. There was one guy who, when he sat in the cart, suddenly his velcroed race suit popped open because he had such a substantial beer belly that not all of he was going to fit in the car. But nevertheless, grandson was second in that race as well. So we're toying with the idea now of getting him into an academy where he can get a bit more tuition. I can talk to him about lines a little bit and so on, but he just seemed to do very well at it and really enjoyed it. So maybe he's not going to be a footballer after all. Maybe he will follow the motoring side of the family. Who knows?
Remember where you heard it.
Maybe a multi-talented sportsman. You know, when you see the likes of so Chris Hoy, for example, he'll be a champion of many different disciplines. But there's potential, isn't there, out there for him to do more than one, perhaps. But fair play, that's good going just to jump in and be sort of second off the bat. Well done him.
His other suggestion was if he does make it to the Premier League and when he's earning oodles of money, he can have a supercar then and not crash it. So
Yeah.
Covering the bases, very good.
That was his take on it. I enjoyed the evening. It was nice to see him really enjoy himself.
We'll be sponsoring him next. I'm not sure what with, but he can put a sticker on the side of his cart. Once he's got his own cart, we'll get some reflective.
Yeah, that's a very very good idea. We'll have some of that.
Good on him. That sounds fantastic. That bodes well for the future. We shall be watching with interest.
I suppose we should probably talk a bit about the UK car market as it stands at the moment, because it's been a bit tumultuous, hasn't it, really, of late? I mean, we've seen some interesting shifts since, love him or loathe him, Elon Musk has made some political moves, shall we say, in America. And he's certainly formed some perhaps less politically acceptable shapes. And as a result of that, we have seen a bit of a downturn in the purchase of Teslas, bearing in mind the Model Y is the most popular car in the world, not just electric car, in just car generally. That's interesting, isn't it? Because it's been a bit of a hit to the sales numbers, I understand.
Just today, it's been announced that Tesla sales in Europe specifically have slumped quite considerably, down from it says here 18,161 a year ago in January. This year, at the same period, only 9,945, which is still a fairly healthy number, but it's about half what he was selling this time last year. And whilst, yes, you can argue that other people are now making electric cars, and perhaps Tesla's USP is slightly been eroded by the influx, not just of the major manufacturers. I mean, every car manufacturer and his wife is making electric car now. Mercedes, BMW, Volkswagen particularly, they're all churning these things out, and there's more and more on the roads day by day. The Chinese particularly, and in the UK, perhaps more than the rest of Europe for perhaps obvious reasons, are more open to the Chinese market. There's a lot more Chinese electric vehicles turning up here. But, as you've mentioned, the antics of the man at the top have not endeared him, and by dint of that, his company, to the rest of Europe, where he is, it has to be said, saying some, depending on what your views are, they're not the most wonderful things to be hearing, particularly if you're German and you hear that he's supporting the far-right opposition, who came second in the elections recently, and he's also allying himself with various right-wing factions here in the UK, amongst others. Personally, I find that quite distasteful, and if I was in the market for a Tesla, I certainly wouldn't be now. And I know there are sales of stickers going through the roof saying I bought this before I knew what a XYZ he was, or the lease is about to expire, don't worry, I'm getting shot.
We're seeing maybe two things going on at the same time. One, I think there is very recently a reflection on his dubious political associations, both in his homeland and elsewhere, and these strange one-armed gestures that he seems to have made on occasion. And yes, he's got some rather extreme political bedfellows, or fellow travellers. And at the same time, are we just seeing the fact that the market is getting a bit bored with Tesla? I mean, it's Teslas have been very desirable, very aspirational. Are we seeing the fact that maybe they're a bit less so? Maybe people are not quite prepared to dig as deeply into their pockets for a car just because it is or was aspirational. And is the market sort of generally turning against them? The product that's coming out of other European car makers and the Far East of the Chinese car makers, is very, very good product, very much more affordable, and it may not, any of it, be quite as desirable yet, but are we seeing a turn in the marketplace in the desirability of Teslas?
I would say there's a multitude of factors here. In terms of Tesla's attractiveness, I think certainly the political, Elon Musk has been part of the issue, I would say. And this is
a major part.
Yeah, and obviously it requires hard data to prove this conclusively. And I think across the world and in America, there have been Teslas being vandalized, actually, dealerships and vehicles themselves. Although I've read something that said we've had to target Cybertrucks because otherwise there wouldn't be any cars left, because everything is a Tesla. And they're a pretty, I think they're a decent car. I do think they're a decent car, whether you like electric cars, that genre, or not. I think they are a relatively good one of them. However, of course, we're on the dawn of a new Model Y, and that's arriving imminently. So why would you buy the current one when there's a new one coming? So that's one thing. I think you also have to consider the reduced interest in EVs, because we found ourselves in an interesting point in time here where the government's insisting on levying a luxury car tax, showroom tax, on all cars over £40,000, which they've done for years, but not EVs, because EVs are more expensive. So when you think that, and we've said it many times before, average family cars are over 40 grand now. It's a lot of money, but that's just what they are. That's one issue, because where's the incentive? Then you've got road tax or road fund license or vehicle excise duty, however you want to say it, which is now going to be applicable to EVs, £190, which wasn't historically, but will be now when people are still rolling around in Peugeot diesels and the like, which have £30 a year road tax. So that's another issue. Why would you? You've still got this weird disparity between VAT on charging, where it's 5% at home and 20% out on the road. So again, why would you? And the network still isn't there. So the government's failed to deliver on many different aspects, and there's no incentive for private buyers to buy, certainly. And although it's still relatively efficient as a company car, the percentage you're going to have to pay is moving up.
This is both the UK market and the European market. Every country is seeing pretty much the same thing. The political pressures are such that they continue to want to drive people into EVs, and the market is becoming increasingly resistant.
It is. People don't like being told what to do. That's another thing entirely. And certainly there'll be a huge proportion of the country, if we're talking just about the UK, for whom an EV isn't suitable because they don't have a driveway or somewhere sensible to be able to park the car. And you're probably listening to this now and thinking, I do, and I can plug it in at home, great, or I don't, and I have to park, 4 or 5 doors down. What do I do then? So, yeah, there are lots of reasons for and against, and we've obviously spoken about a lot of those in the past. The other issue, I think, is that European manufacturers, the EVs that they're producing, aren't that much better than the inbound Chinese equivalents, and they are expensive.
Yeah.
The VW ID range is quite literally okay. They are cars. I think they're fine. In my experience, the Mercedes EVs, the Audi EVs, again, are okay. But I think that EV manufacturers tend to do a better job of making EVs because presumably that's their intent. They haven't either tried to adapt another vehicle to be an EV or otherwise, had their full attention on it. So, yeah, I mean, the issue is then we've got a load of new entrants coming in, and research has shown that a Chinese car, for people to accept it, would need to be cheaper. We probably accept that. We kind of expect them to be a bit cheaper. But can you guess by how much it would need to be cheaper for someone to choose it over an alternative?
A good 50%, I should think, for starters.
Go on, Graham, give me a number.
I 25 to 30%, I would have thought. Not 50%, I don't think.
So when you're talking something like a Model Y equivalent, the answer was, and this was carried out by a research agency called JATO, £3,000. That's what the data has shown. £3,000 cheaper is enough to persuade people. And it surprised me because I thought that's a tiny amount. Surely that can't be right. But that is what the data suggests. There is a bit of an odd disparity in terms of who are likely to trust it. The data shows that people under 51 far more likely to accept it. People over 51 less likely. So the younger you get, the more accepting people are of the newer technology and newer comers into the market. And of course, as we'd said a few moments ago, there are a number of newcomers coming into the market. And this isn't just a case of they're trying to get over here. We are talking about their R&D centres being in the UK. So someone like Chang'an, I think they have about 140 people working over here, and overall something like 90,000 people working for the company with centres across the world. So they produce a huge amount, including building Fords in China. They build them for Ford under license. You have companies like XPENG, which are coming and are pretty much here and are being imported by International Motors in the same way that sort of Mitsubishi were. And I'll be honest, I've driven this car. I've popped up to the head office and I've looked at it and I've driven it.
This is meant to be the Tesla Model Y killer, isn't it?
Yeah, and you know what? It kind of is. If you like the Model Y, and you like, again, that genre of vehicle, you probably will quite like this. So the XPENG is a decent car. It has that familiar face that we've come to expect of SUV/crossovery things in 2025. So if you've not seen this, do a quick Google, the G6, XPENG G6. It has the single visor across the front, and then the main headlamps are hidden away where the fog lamps would be down below. So you can imagine what this is going to look like, because if you've seen any vehicle of this type, yes, it looks the same as that. The design, as I understand, has been in some way influenced by AI. But the whole thing is effectively just a smooth, efficient, comfortable EV. And if you were thinking the quality was going to be less than something else, like, I don't know, like the Tesla, I suppose, really, then I hate to tell you, it isn't really. It is much of a muchness. It's relatively quick, certainly very torquey, could probably do with a bit more steering feedback, but otherwise it's a perfectly acceptable, comfortable car. The real difference between this and I think a lot of the Chinese manufacturers versus a lot of the European ones is that it's hugely software based and the software is quite well integrated. So it was a cold day when I went to go and drive this and have a bit of a look and a poke around. And the chap that was showing me said, "Oh, you fancy having the fire on?" And this wasn't some sort of EV joke. He hit some buttons on the dash. Some flames popped up in the screen in the center. It put the heating on to maximum and made the car as cozy as it could be for you. Yes, that's a gimmick, but the point is that the whole car is based on and around software. So if there's an issue, you're driving along and they've identified that there's a fault or there's an upgrade that can be done, these updates can be made very quickly without having to tap into specific modules in the car, without having to plug the car in a programming. It's done over the air in a very clever and I think quite comprehensive way. And the chap was explaining, because he had the original vehicles in the UK on test, that there were some minor niggles that just didn't play very well with the UK market. I think it might have been distance to junctions, where we're kind of odd in the UK, aren't we? Where we don't really talk about kilometres, we talk about miles and miles per hour, but we buy fuel in litres, and so there's odd ways that we have to look and approach and calculate things. So he was basically fine tuning the car, and he was making the suggestions, and they were getting fixed, resolved, and uploaded within the space of a few days. And the truth of the matter is, these cars are developing very, very quickly. So we talk about the development cycle of a car and a European car. So taking, for example, a European EV, it might be that it's had a 5-year development cycle before it becomes live. China is typically working, they call this China speed. Basically, for every 3 years that European manufacturers are spending in development, China are able to do that in about a year. So they're able to develop cars far, far faster. And I was in the main showroom at the head office looking at these new XPENGs, and they had a couple that were there. They had a beautifully swoopy saloon, and I think it was the G9, which is the big one, and that had a full Atmos surround sound system. And it was playing music, and it was doing like the Dolby effect, where you get the speakers, one side to the other, all that kind of thing. These huge, super comfortable chairs where the leg rest would pop up from the front, and you could just sit and relax. And they came back and said, "What do you think of the car?" And touch screen, everything is so responsive, it's instant, absolutely instant, to the extent where, as you were opening the door was opening on the infographic in real time. When the indicators were flashing, they were flashing in real time. Brake lights, you get the picture. And the graphics on the car were happening in real time. And I said, it's so much faster than a lot of the stuff that I've been used to, not in terms of the speed of the car, because let's just ignore that for a moment, but the actual technology in the car. I said, yeah, this is old technology, and it's on its way out. It's being replaced now.
I commented a long time ago that, when the first generations of Japanese cars started to appear, they were quirky and cranky, and they looked odd, and they didn't function all that well, and so on. And I think there was a lot of people assumed that as the Chinese cars started to enter the marketplace, that they would equally be, sort of one step behind mechanically and in terms of software and general fit and finish and so on. That ain't the case. They are very, very good cars coming on the market. And as you say, they're developing them very quickly. There are a lot of the future Chinese car makers setting up European bases now, both development and manufacturing. And they simply are able to develop faster and reflect, I think, changes within the marketplace much quicker than has been the case for European car makers.
Absolutely. And as a result of that, they're able to give customers what they want and not what they think customers will want for the next 3 years until a car has a facelift or mid-cycle action. But for those of you that are interested in this vehicle, its range is about 350 miles, WLTP, 0 to 60 times a bit over 6 seconds. So plenty for a family car, really. That's that was hot hatch territory, wasn't it, until very recently, and 10 to 80% charge in about 20 minutes. The charging technology that they have in these cars is exceptional, and the 20 minutes, 10 to 80% charge is relatively realistic because it uses 800-volt architecture, and that's unusual in something like a small family car, or smallish family car, mid-sized family car, anything like that really at the moment, unless you're talking sort of Porsche or similar. But yeah, it is pretty clever, and I was impressed, and by the very nature of what we do, we obviously get to drive a lot of different cars, and it did make me think, this is here, whether we like it or not, this is coming. And you will see, MG sold more cars than Vauxhall last year. So it's coming. It's going to be there. It's going to be here, whether we like it or not. So, yeah. What is interesting, looking forward in the market as to what's coming next, there's definitely a greater shift towards plug-in hybrid vehicles and more hybrids. So whether the government ultimately, having finished its consultation on EVs and also the various different emissions targets and move towards electrification, will consider looking again at it. But we're in a position now where we're going to be looking at super range extenders, or sort of super PHEVs, which will have a battery of about 276 miles, but with an engine as well to be able to extend its range. So theoretically on a tank, you'll be looking about 900 miles, which is pretty incredible, isn't it? I mean, you charge the battery up where you go, but there's not many places that you can get to from here where you need to do more than 900 miles before replenishing yourself or the car, is there? And at that point, why do you need an EV? So it's interesting. I think there's a whole lot going on in the market right now, and probably it warrants a podcast all on its own, but perhaps one for another time.
But it's interesting you'd say that, because we've just had a press release just in the last day or two that's shown some of the depreciation on modern cars. And if you look, most of the ones that are absolutely shedding value are electric vehicles. I mean, the highlighted comparison that they've sort of flagged to us is the Fiat 500e, which in itself is a cute little thing. And I think they've done a great job of sort of electrifying the car that is basically on every single street in Britain. But if you compare it with the other cute little reimagining of a lovely little iconic car from a similar amount of years gone by, the Mini Cooper, the petrol Mini Cooper, the Fiat 500e has lost 52% of its value in the last year, compared to minus about 17% for the Mini Cooper, and it's the same for the new Vauxhall Corsa, the electric version. Compare that with the petrol one, it's gone down. You've lost about 55% of your value on the electric one, compared to only 35 for the equivalent petrol. That says a lot, really, doesn't it? That I think electric cars have been overpriced, if nothing else. That speaks to a lot of what we've just been saying. The exciting new Eastern offerings that we're going to be getting are going to be considerably cheaper. Just looking at the price of the XPENG, I mean, it's 40 grand entrance price, which isn't cheap. But when you consider that Fiat wanted, knocking on 38 for a Fiat 500e, you'd be looking to put yourself away and be locked up if you thought, I know which one's the better value and which one's going to keep its money. I'd be in the XPENG every day of the week.
I was I'm both intrigued and amused by a heavyweight article in one of the Sundays by somebody who was clearly fairly ill-informed but had an agenda that he desired to follow, which suggested that EVs would last just as long and hold their prices just as well as more conventional vehicles. How can you say that? Because they've been around long enough for you to do any valid statistics on the longevity of them. And the fact is, they're not holding their value for two reasons. I think one is that the second-hand market is not as buoyant as some would have you believe. And as you quite rightly said, Dave, a lot of those cars are overpriced to start with. A lot of I think particularly the European car makers, have sought to invest in EVs and to attempt to recoup their investment costs too rapidly. And their investment costs have perhaps been too high to start with anyway. So trying to claw that back by pricing themselves as highly as they have done, hasn't done them any longer term favours. And I think the EVs have just not been around long enough. How long have I been driving them? 10 years or so. They haven't been around long enough to prove that they just have the longevity of more conventionally powered cars.
I think there's a few things to unpick there, really. In terms of the value, are they going to be worth as much forever? No, I think not, because apart from anything else, technology moves on, and an iPhone 15 versus an iPhone 7. So look, if you look at it in terms of technology, things move on, and whereas an engine is still an engine, admittedly with some hybrid assistance and some flashier connectivity inside the car, fine. Will it last as long as an engine car? Yeah, I think it probably will. And there is probably enough data now to prove that is the case in most cases. If you look at the likes of the Tesla taxis that are going around, and there are some seriously high mileage cars out there now, which have many hundreds of thousands of miles behind them, then yes. And it's the same argument with charging up a battery, as we've spoken before. Phone battery gets knackered in whatever it might be, 2 or 3 years, you buy a new phone, but you charge up every night. So you've done over 1,000 charges in it. If you've got a 250, 300 mile range, you've done 300,000 miles in a car. And if you've done 300,000 miles in a petrol car, you probably throw it away at the end of it. And the technology is far more sophisticated. There's better control. Yeah, in most cases, unless it's, a Volvo, a hallowed Volvo, most modern cars aren't going to do 300,000 miles. Your Fiat 500 on parts on the street corner probably won't see 250,000 miles in most cases. I'm sure there are exceptions.
Yeah, there are very few that are going to achieve anywhere near those sorts of numbers. Although you'll still have the pub authority who will tell you that high mileage cars are don't touch them.
Down to maintenance, isn't it?
Many cars will go 100, 150,000 without too much trouble these days.
Yeah, certainly. I think it's down to maintenance. I think the bigger problem with the market and EVs is, yes, they're expensive off the bat, and I think European manufacturers have charged a premium for them, and that's probably a mistake, because we're in a position where there isn't the tariffs coming into the UK for vehicles, and so the likes of China can sell them in a lot cheaper, and that will certainly hurt the legacy manufacturers. The bigger problem is that we have politically ruined ourselves in this country. What's happened is, in order to try and meet the requirements for registering vehicles, 22% last year, which, broadly speaking, we've got to where we wanted to go, manufacturers have self-registered. I say manufacturers, it's the dealers probably that have been hurt by this, but they've self-registered themselves sideways to try and get to the number they need to get to. This year it's 28%, and it's not going to happen. So what's happened is that they supposedly, so I understand from SMMT data, that effectively it's cost the industry about 4 billion to do this, to basically get to where they need to go. So it's not sustainable, it's not possible, and it's a mess. I walked into a BMW dealer at the weekend. I'd driven over in my Mini, gone and picked up some shoes for my eldest from the shops down the road, and he'd seen the Mini dealership and wanted to go and have a look. There's a Mini dealership and the BMW dealer next to it. Looked around a 3 Series. Salesman came over, said, "Oh, what are you looking for?" All the normal bits. Very friendly chap, and they were very accommodating. The point I'm getting to here is that they then, after a bit of a chat, said, would I be interested in an electric vehicle? And I explained that I'd driven an i4 and an i5, and there are reviews of these if you look at our podcast. And he said, we have an i5 M60, which is the quick one. It's a 3.8 second to 60 car. It's 97.5 grand's worth of car. It's expensive. It's a lovely, lovely thing. He said, I've never seen anything like this before, but we have an incredible special. We had 5 cars. He said, I've got one left. He said, if you'd like this car, 2-year lease, it's £1,500 down and £499 a month. Now, that is an insane price. That is the price of a Focus or something, less than Focus.
Yeah, that's mad.
A standard A3, an A3 Sport down the road for me was something along the lines of 3,999 down, so 4 grand down, 399 a month. So the value that you get there is incredible. And they're doing that because they want to get to a number of registered vehicles. It's kicking the can down the road, because in 2 years' time, they've then got to do something with that car. But what they've actually done then is just absolutely obliterate the value of their 1-year-old cars.
Yeah.
So why would you buy why would you buy a used one at that point?
That is really, really not a sustainable business practice, is it? And
No.
dealers are being forced into that by this desperate need to sell sufficient, appropriately government-approved cars.
Yes.
And that just is not a sustainable way forward. It just destroys the market.
It has, and we've obliterated our market. So we have a perfect storm going on here. EVs are going to be more expensive to run because of the showroom tax and also the vehicle excise duty that we're going to have to pay. We've had a market where it's been flooded, so it'll erode the used car values. There have been cases where manufacturers have been too greedy. Ford added $7,000 overnight to the price of the Mach-E at one point, partly because of the swing in the dollar versus pound and cost of importing, all that kind of stuff, but also because they thought they could, because at one point Tesla did it. Then, for example, when Tesla suddenly cut costs, that then eroded the market. So we've got a huge glut of cars that not everybody wants, a huge pressure to register them as brand new vehicles, and then something to do with them when they will come off lease in a year or 2 years. So we're going to end up flooding the market. So in Europe, but certainly in the UK, we have destroyed our own market. So it's a perfect storm whereby if you're a manufacturer that's able to offer cars into a market, Germany is the biggest European market. The UK is just behind it, which is incredible considering our size compared to lots of countries in Europe. So if you're able to offer vehicles tariff-free into a market, suddenly that becomes very attractive. And there you go. China's able to offer these vehicles at the moment. They'll be able to make an absolute fortune, potentially, by selling them into the country. So not only have politically we squashed, well, I say we, the government in charge has basically squashed the European car manufacturers and screwed them down to try and produce cars and get them out to register this number. We've now opened the doors at the same time. So it's an almighty mess. It's an almighty mess when consumer demand isn't there. So a complex question. I hope that somehow summarises my thoughts on it.
I like your analogy of the perfect storm. I think all we need now is a weatherman named Fish to tell us exactly what's not going to happen or is going to happen. But I like the perfect storm.
Year I was born, that was. There must be something left for those of us that do still want to talk about and enjoy cars for what they are. So come on, guys, give me something to look forward to.
Well, a little piece of news that caught my eye, and I don't know whether it's confirmed yet, but I do understand Ford are likely to go back to Le Mans. There are rumours that it'll be 2027, so it would be great to see.
Would be an iconic name.
Maybe another movie in there somewhere.
There's always another movie somewhere. They'll just reboot the one they did a few years ago. There you go. It's easy. It's nothing new in films anymore, but hopefully something new at Le Mans. It would be really good to see the blue oval going around Le Mans again. They've been away too long.
And do you know what? I really would like to see Ford back at Le Mans. It's interesting how Ford are getting so involved with motorsport at the moment, and I'm really pleased that they are. But if you sort of think back to historically what it was for and how they were able to sell cars from it, so think Cortinas, think Jim Clark, think the BTCC Super Touring Mondeos and such in the UK, and then again when they're abroad with the Mustang, it makes sense that they'll be doing GT4. However, there aren't any cars left anymore, so you sort of wonder who it is they're aiming this at. Because if it's enthusiasts, there's the Mustang left, and of course you can still buy a GT. But for us mere mortals, it's difficult to go out and buy a car that looks remotely like the ones that you see on track, don't you? I find that really hard to work with.
Yeah, win on Sunday and sell on Monday is a little more tenuous than it perhaps was in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s even.
Yeah, and this is why I've always really enjoyed the likes of touring cars and rally, probably over the likes of Formula One and the rest, because for me it's more relatable to what I can see and what I can drive. So I do find that a little bit odd, but nevertheless, far be it for me to argue with this particular policy. I think it's great to see them out there again. So that is definitely something to look forward to.
And it does look like we've got quite a summer of motorsport, historic and classic motorsport coming our way.
Yes, as you were saying, yes, to continue the theme of motorsporting year, coming up the weekend, 2nd, 3rd and 4th of May, which I believe will be a bank holiday, you've got the 2025 Donington Historic Festival, which could be quite a hoot. There's all sorts of stuff going on there. 12 world-class historic racing grids, they say, which means you've got all sorts of things from past and present day touring cars, Le Mans names. So there may be a bit of Ford there to keep you going until 2027. Some of the Donington era GP. Obviously, Donington held Formula One races as well. What were pre-Formula One, but Grand Prix racing back in the pre-war era. They were famous there for
Donington.
Amazing racing. I mean, you see some of the black and white footage of them hurtling around there. It's astonishing. So you can have your appetite whetted if you search for the Donington Historic Festival 2025, as I say, beginning of May. I think you're going to get quite a disparate group of people turning up to that, because it looks like there's going to be something for everyone. And just to sort of put it back in our wheelhouse, there are pictures on the press release of what must be a mid-70s Capri going around with all the tape over its lights and a roll cage and all sorts of things. So, for all your Capri fans, get down there, because your Ford appetite will be whetted by such things.
Well, consider me wet. And on that note, I suppose it's probably time for us to end. So thank you so much for listening, and thank you to everyone that's also subscribed since the last podcast. We see the details popping up, particularly when you subscribe to us on YouTube, in our email inboxes. It brings us a little bit of joy. So do remember to go and find us. We are at UKMotorTalk everywhere. And I've been Mike. Goodbye.
And I've been Graham. Good night. Look after yourselves.
And I've been Dave. Take care, and we'll see you at Donington in a few months. But until then, in a couple of weeks' time, come back and join us. You never know what we might be up to.
Could be anything.
Yeah, it probably isn't.
UKMotorTalk, a First Take Media production.